Did you know? Sega once negotiated with Sony to create a new console, but eventually abandoned the idea. Sony would later release the PlayStation in competition with the Sega Saturn, whose poor sales led to the creation of the Dreamcast. In a cruel twist of fate, Tom Kalinske, former CEO of Sega of America, confirmed that the console specs Sega had proposed for the project were used by Sony for the PlayStation. Also, the technical achievements of Sega's Virtua Fighter inspired Sony to focus on 3D rather than 2D. Sega had inadvertently convinced Sony to undermine the Sega Saturn. In turn, Sony's success with 3D convinced Sega that how their next system handled graphics would be of the utmost importance. Throughout the creation of the Dreamcast, Sega partnered with Lockheed Martin, Nvidia, Videologic, 3DFX, and Microsoft, all at different stages of development. They initially went through Lockheed Martin, who were also developing graphical assets for Sega's N3 arcade boards at the time. Progress was slow, however, and the two companies parted ways. Sega then partnered with Nvidia, who based their first graphics card, the NV1, on Sega Saturn hardware. When sales of this video card were poor, the successor to the NV1, which would likely have been used for the Dreamcast, was shelved. Following that, Sega effectively scrapped all of their plans and approached two separate companies, Videologic and 3DFX. The two companies began work on different systems. The Videologic project, initially codenamed Dural after the character in Virtua Fighter, was being developed in Japan. The 3DFX project, dubbed Black Belt, was being worked on in the US. Sega then partnered with Microsoft to work on the Black Belt project for undisclosed reasons. The project was shown to a limited number of developers and was well received. This was because the console's operating system was easy to develop for and allowed for quick ports from PC. However, due to complications with 3DFX, amongst other issues, Sega would instead go with the Dural project, which was renamed to Katana. It seemed like that would be the end of Microsoft's inclusion on the project. However, in 1998, Microsoft announced that a version of Windows CE would be available as an OS for the Dreamcast. They cooperated with Sega to show off Windows CE as a worthwhile operating system for console gaming, but it showed limited capabilities in comparison to the native operating system. Their partnership with Sega over, Microsoft launched the Xbox in 2001, roughly half a year after Sega discontinued the Dreamcast. In the time preceding the discontinuation of the Dreamcast, Sega chairman Isao Okawa visited Bill Gates several times to discuss the possibility of the Xbox playing Dreamcast games natively. Okawa insisted that internet was indispensable for the Dreamcast games, but Microsoft refused to provide online support, so negotiations fell through. Though he was unable to secure a migratory path for existing Dreamcast fans, Okawa made a sizable donation of $695 million in his own stock in Sega to keep them from going bankrupt. Shortly thereafter, Okawa passed away due to a heart failure. Despite the conclusion of Okawa's negotiations, Sega strongly backed the Xbox very early on. At Tokyo Game Show 2001, Sega announced an 11-game deal for the system, which would include many sequels to Dreamcast games, such as Jet Set Radio Future, Panzer Dragoon Orta, Sega GT 2002, and Sega GT Online, as well as Crazy Taxi 3 High Roller. Also announced was Gun Valkyrie, a 3D action game being developed by Sega's Smilebit studio that was originally planned for the Dreamcast. One of Xbox's biggest exclusives, Fable, was also going to be a Dreamcast game. This was exposed during an interview between Examiner.com and Fable Anniversary lead designer Tim Timmons. The Dreamcast had a wide variety of accessories throughout its relatively short lifespan. One of these accessories is the Dream Blaster, a light gun developed by Mad Catz. The United States never received a light gun that was actually produced by Sega, although they did make one. While there's no official comment regarding why Sega chose not to release it in the US, it was likely a decision made in light of the then recent Columbine High School massacre. Sega also released a camera for the Dreamcast called the Dream Eye, but again it would only be made available in Japan. While it could only store 31 pictures in JPEG format, it was also intended to be used as a webcam and even came with a microphone headset. There was also a motion controller planned for the Dreamcast. The goal was to use it for Air Knights, a sequel to Nights into Dreams, and it was rumored to have contributed to the creation of Super Monkey Ball. The motion controller itself was never released, but the technology was eventually implemented in the maracas for Samba de Amigo. The Dreamcast's core accessories, the visual memory units or VMUs, each held 122 kilobytes. The combined capacity of all VMUs ever sold is approximately 1 terabyte, enough to store all 730 games ever released for the Dreamcast. Should one of those VMUs have a Puyo Puyo Fever save file, pressing start on the system menu toggles an alternate 3D menu with a rotatable viewpoint. And should you ever pop open a VMU, you'll see the word potato clearly printed on the chip. It would appear the potato means nothing outside of being a joking play on potato chip. The Dreamcast startup sound was composed by Ryuichi Sakamoto, BAFTA award-winning keyboardist and sometimes vocalist for the Japanese electronic band Yellow Magic Orchestra. He apparently had many friends in the video game industry, but his only other direct involvement with video games would be the musical score for the Dreamcast game LOL Lack of Love. The name Dreamcast was selected from over 5,000 different entries in a public competition held by Sega. The company had planned to remove its own name from the product and establish Dreamcast as its own brand, but Sega president Shoichiro Irimajiri's management team decided to keep the Sega logo on the system. The Dreamcast logo, a red swirl, was said by Irimajiri to symbolize the origin of power. The logo is a blue swirl in the PAL regions, which was likely done to avoid legal conflict with the German publishing firm Tivola, whose logo prominently features a red swirl. Dreamcast games are stored on GD-ROMs rather than CD-ROMs or DVDs. GD-ROMs use tighter packed pits on the disc, thus bringing the storage capacity up to around 1 gigabyte, hence the name Gigabyte Disc ROM. A GD-ROM won't play in a CD player, but if it's inserted into a device which can access CD files, a warning message can be found, which states,
"This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now."
The Dreamcast had a peculiar post-mortem life. Sega's final game for the system, Puyo Pop Fever, came out 3 years after the Dreamcast had been discontinued. While Sega had finally moved on, as of this video's release, there are still games being developed for the Dreamcast. Over a dozen unlicensed independent games have made their way onto the platform since its discontinuation. For a brief time in 2006, Sega was even selling refurbished Dreamcast consoles through its online store in Japan, bundled with a new game called Radergy. There have been many unlicensed games released for the Dreamcast, partially due to the same reasons the Dreamcast had a rampant piracy problem. While piracy is an issue for any console, Sega's proprietary GD-ROM format was essentially their only method of piracy protection. Sega also originally intended for a format known as MIL-CD to be used on the console. It would enhance the experience of playing music CDs on a Dreamcast with features such as navigational menus and video. The discovery of MIL-CD support led to the creation of the Utopia boot disk, a booting program developed by Ware's group Utopia. The boot disk engaged the alternate boot method in the BIOS intended for MIL CDs. This allowed users to copy pirated versions of the GD-ROM games onto regular CDs, and then run them by simply inserting the boot disk first. Eventually, versions of the pirated games were released in MIL CD format, rendering the boot disk unnecessary and making the pirating process that much easier. That's all for today, but don't forget to subscribe to Did You Know Gaming and follow Did You Know Gaming on Facebook and Twitter. Make sure you also check out didyouknowgaming.com, and if you like this video, check out some of our other videos as well. And if you're still looking for more to click on, why not check out my video over Sonic Shuffle? I mean, it's a Dreamcast game, and this video was about the Dreamcast, so, you know, it kinda makes sense.